Hello, my name is Elena Amachkina. I'm a senior lecturer at Moscow State Lomonosov University Law School. In this presentation, I'll concentrate on teaching grammar as part of a course of English for specific and academic purposes, with a special focus on how to integrate the grammatical competence of the students with perceptive and productive skills. I will also describe a methodological experiment conducted in several groups of law students that study English as a compulsory part of their curriculum. Although this paper focuses on a very narrow setting, the strategies and materials presented here can be adapted to a broad variety of teaching contexts, starting from different books selected for home reading and finishing with different areas of professional interests of the students, different age groups and levels of proficiency. Approaches to teaching grammar have long been the focus of attention and subject for much debate for language teaching practitioners and theorists. Thus, following the recent trend for purely communicative methods and task-based teaching, there has now been a return to the more traditional way of explicit and curriculum-based presentation and practice of grammatical material. Moreover, several researchers have come to the conclusion that explicit knowledge of grammar proves to be a more sound base than implicit, that integrating grammar in a task is not necessary and does not lead to better linguistic performance. While these conclusions refer to language learning in general, some additional problems come to the fore when English for specific purposes is concerned. Several years' experience of teaching English grammar in groups of law school students has revealed an interesting paradox. When concentrating on grammatical issues, the students make few mistakes in tests and exercises. They do show sound explicit knowledge of grammar, provided that they are normally diligent learners. But as soon as they switch to discussing their professional topics in English, which forms the greater part of their course, they seem to forget much of what they know about grammar. This concerns both the mistakes they make and the range of grammatical structures they try to use. So here comes the question of contextual integration of grammar. Whether drills-based or task-based, grammar is traditionally taught as a separate block within the course of English, partly because many of the popular and reliable grammar books that are usually used in class are not subject-oriented and are intended for the broadest audience of language learners. The result often is that the students successfully cope with grammatical exercises and tests, but fail to use this perfectly drilled knowledge in speaking and writing activities, especially in their professional contexts. The roots of the problem seem to be in the disconnection of grammatical material with the content side. They simply don't see the link between what they study in grammar class and the material they deal with in other kinds of activities. Hence the solution, where English for specific purposes is concerned, not only the illustrative material should preferably be taken from the same range of topics that the students are supposed to discuss, but also the extensive practice should be based on these topics, and what is more important, integrated with perceptive and productive skills, speaking and writing in the first place, in the contexts and genres that the students are supposed to master. In this respect, grammar book drills and mere correcting and explaining mistakes when they occur in speech or writing are simply not enough. A kind of intermediate stage that proves to be effective here is specially elaborated activities that enable grammar acquisition based on and integrated with specific content-oriented materials. Home reading in this perspective can provide plenty of textual material and potential activities to build on. The books should be chosen to reflect the student's professional sphere of interest and to provoke extensive discussion. Grammatical tasks may be made part of the discussion process and arranged according to the length of the chunks of speech expected from the student, from the shortest to the longest, so that grammatical modals gradually become part of a phrase, a short paragraph, a lengthy deliberation on the subject, and finally, part of the student's active language. In the experiment I'd like to describe, this teaching strategy was used in several groups of first-year law school students who study English for 2 years as part of their curriculum. They had 6 hours of English per week and 3 different classes: Introduction to Legal English, Grammar and Home Reading, and lectures on the history of English-speaking countries, all the 3 taught by different teachers. Grammar and Home Reading were combined in one class, which facilitated the process of their integration. The students' proficiency levels ranged from low intermediate to advanced. This allowed to use a broad variety of activities, while on the other hand, the differences in the students' levels and background knowledge made the task of the teacher more challenging. In this presentation, I will describe some exercises based on John Grisham's novel The Firm. The students were supposed to cover one unit from grammar book and 1 or 2 chapters of reading each week, and a large part of the activities in class were a combination of grammar practice with a discussion of the book content. As the course of grammar was remedial and most of the material was more or less familiar to the students, usually a brief presentation of the new topic by the teacher was followed by extensive practice. The drills from the grammar book would usually be assigned for homework, as they can easily be checked with the key and discussed where problems occur. Normally, the teacher would present a new topic using both the examples from the grammar book and the ones based on the book for home reading. Ideally, the examples would be found in the recent chapters, read out and discussed. The context of current university life could also provide plenty of material to be used as additional examples. This modification to the otherwise traditional way of presenting grammatical issues seems to me very important, and I'd like to emphasize that, because from the very first stage, grammar is put in a familiar and relevant context in which the students are supposed to use it. It turns from something abstract into something really tangible. The tasks were arranged in a way that a grammatical structure would gradually become part of longer and longer chunks of the student's own speech, but particular strategies could vary from class to class, depending on the topic and the material under discussion. Thus, for example, the practice of past tenses based on the Firm by John Grisham began with the drills like gap filling of phrases for translation prepared by the teacher and based on the plot of the first 2 chapters. Then the students suggested similar phrases to each other in pairs or teams. The next exercise was summarizing the chapters sentence by sentence. Each student added 1 sentence to the summary, and the next person had to continue. This allowed the students some flexibility in what they wanted to say. They had to think about the content and the grammatical form at the same time. And also this made the students listen to each other attentively, something which is really important in a big class, but often hard to achieve. The final activity consisted in writing a letter from Major Abbey, the main characters of the book, to their parents, describing the events of the first chapters and using as many past tense forms as possible. This can also be used as a final revision exercise for all tenses. The first chapters of the Firm are full of events. They describe Mitch's final weeks at law school, job interviews, and a visit to a law firm that was offering to hire him. The students were free to choose the events they wanted to mention, so there were no 2 similar letters. They were then read out to the group or shared and corrected in pairs. The practice of other grammatical topics was organized in a similar way. For instance, studying modal verbs, the students concentrated on the predictions about the development of the plot and made guesses about the activity of the strange law firm where the main character became an associate. Practicing conditionals, the students discussed different possibilities for the main character, who started to guess what the real work of the firm was about and how dangerous his own position was. They also made hypotheses about the things he could have done differently. This was done through questions and answers in pairs and through short narratives made in teams orally and then individually in written form. Making hypotheses can be turned into great fun if it is done in teams and each next speaker continues and develops the idea of the previous person. The practice of reported speech began with a brainstorm or a team game in which the students had to remember as many different report verbs as they could. Then they discussed the shades of meaning and tried to use these verbs in contexts. The next task was to turn the dialogues from the current chapter of the book into reported speech, not using the verbs say, tell, ask, or answer, but any other verbs that were suitable. The final task was to retell a chapter concentrating on the conversations, which are planned in the novel, again trying to avoid the 4 basic report verbs. The result of the experiment was that, being presented and practiced in this way, grammatical modals started to associate with particular content, familiar and important to the students, and consequently their performance while speaking on these topics improved in terms of grammar. This integrated approach to teaching grammar and home reading combines in each class the 4 strands that Paul Nation suggests should be present in any course. That is, meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, language-focused learning, and fluency development, which are all linked here by the same context. Grammar is thus integrated with content, which makes the transition from theory to speech much easier. Although this paper focuses on a very narrow setting, the structures and materials presented here can be adapted to a broad variety of teaching contexts, starting from different books selected for home reading and finishing with different areas of professional interests of the students, different ages and levels of proficiency. Thank you for your attention.